Renault Sandero of the first generation, 2009-2014 years of release. Good day, if you are wondering is it worth buying a first generation Renault Sandero and what problems you may encounter during operation, then you're at the right place. So when buying a used Renault Sandero, you should definitely pay attention to the place where the C-pillar and the roof meet. Here in the area of the drain, cracks are traditionally formed on the paintwork. Because of this, repainting the roof of the car is hardly advisable, but it's quite possible to slightly reduce the price when buying. The drain holes at the bottom of the doors also require special attention. Under the plastic plugs installed in them, surface corrosion of the metal is almost always hidden. Worse, Sandero doors will gradually start to corrode from the inside anyway, and all because of an engineering miscalculations. The creators of Sandero for some reason placed the drain wells just above the bottom point of the doors. As a result, some part of the moisture that has got into the cavity of the door is not removed from there and begins to provoke the initiation of the process of corrosion formation. At first glance it seems that there are many problems with the body. Oil on the fire is also added by some particularly knowledgeable motorists who equate the Logan sedan and the Sandero hatchback in absolutely everything. The two models that share a common platform are indeed very similar, but in terms of the corrosion resistance of the body, the Sandero still wins. First of all, those Logans that were released in 2007-2008. The first copies of the sedan had problems with the quality of the sealant applied to the body seams and with the paintwork and often with the build quality. Even on the new Renault Logan, the thickness of the paintwork on different body elements could differ by 1.5 times, which in combination with not the best quality metal subsequently led to many problems. The Renault Sandero hatchback was saved to some extent by the fact that it went into production a few years after the Logan sedan. By this time, the bosses of the French company realized that just a 6-year guarantee against corrosion perforation was more likely to scare away potential buyers. As a result, by mid-2008, Renault began to use galvanized metal more widely and the quality of painting on the conveyor increased. By the time the Sandero went into production, many of the technological problems that had tarnished the Logan sedan's reputation had long been resolved. It is not for nothing that even the frankly killed Sandero of the first generation with a mileage of more than 300,000 kilometers still looks more or less worthy. As a rule, there is no strong crime when inspecting the underside of a car. Taking into account the advanced age of the first Sandero, a red plaque formed around the gas tank and on the elements of the exhaust system can be considered absolutely normal. The body seems rust more strongly, but there is no need to talk about any serious margin of safety at the moment. The picture looks absolutely standard in the area of the wheel arches. They will be slightly damaged by sand and stones flying from under the wheels, but nothing more. Rather, when looking at a used Sandero from below, it's worth paying attention to the condition of the front subframe. On cars built on the B0 platform, it's considered delicate. Over time, the rear and center mounts can loosen a little, after which the suspension geometry will begin to walk a little. The fact that the few chrome elements on the body of Renault Sandero grow cloudy over time and then begin to climb altogether is not surprising. To a certain extent, this problem is characteristic of absolutely all vehicles operating in Russian conditions. Another weak point of the French hatchback is the leaky tail lights. Condensation forms in them with enviable regularity. Fortunately, this does not affect the performance of the lanterns. Owners of Sandero also face the failure of the rear fog lamp. In most cases, it stops working due to broken contacts. Over the years, the driver's door lock begins to refuse. We'll have to put up with too soft windshield. Although, given the considerable mileage of the first generation Sandero, minor damage is inevitable. If you don't want to put up with a worn-out windshield, you can replace it. The cost of new glass is low. The good news is the sturdy front and rear bumpers. They're not afraid of light blows. Interior plastic Renault Sandero not only looks cheap but can also scratch with a sharp flash around the edges. In terms of durability of finishing materials, Sandero is average at best. The leather upholstery of the steering wheel, which is not found on all versions of the hatchback, is pretty much worn out already to the mark of 100-120,000 kilometers. The plastic steering wheel lasts much longer, but it also gives up and begins to climb in pieces to the 200,000 mark. If handled carelessly, the silver painted inserts will begin to peel even earlier. By the mark of 150,000 kilometers, the driver's seat may look deplorable. Under heavy drivers it almost reaches the frame. Door seals do not look the best for the same run. The owners of Sandero themselves also contribute. They're trying to somehow decorate the interiors, supplement it with non-standard equipment, but the aesthetic appearance of many improvements as a rule leaves much to be desired. There are very few electronic systems in Renault Sandero, including thanks to this, any serious problems with the electrics are not typical for the French car. Rather, you will have to get nervous because of periodic glitches. For example, information about the coolant temperature is displayed in the instrument cluster using special divisions. Often only 2 divisions correspond to a warmed up, absolutely serviceable engine, sometimes as many as 4. In this case, the temperature of the coolant in both cases will be the same. Such confusion may scare recent Sandero owners, but seasoned hatchback owners tend to get used to this display feature. The imperfection of Sandero's electronic brains is also manifested when refueling a running car. Even when the tank is full to the brim, the onboard computer will still show the level of fuel that was in the tank before visiting the gas station. In order for the fuel level readings to be recalculated, you will have to turn off and restart the car. However, the surprises do not end there. Like the coolant temperature, information on the residual fuel supplies is very conditional. In no case should one rely entirely on the divisions displayed in the instrument cluster. To avoid unpleasant surprises, it is worth refueling Sandero even when the onboard computer shows that about a quarter of the fuel remains in the tank. In the interval from 100 to 150,000 kilometers, the steering column switch starts to work intermittently, and since with its help the sound signal, the windshield wipers and the optics are controlled on Renault Sandero, they also begin to malfunction respectively. In the end, the completely released pedal switch has to be replaced with a new one. By the distance of 130–150,000 kilometers, the first problems with the air conditioner arise. At best, the inexpensive compressor clutch bearing will have to be replaced. At worst, a much more expensive air conditioner radiator will go for replacement. By a run of 150,000 kilometers, the generator develops its resource, which will be reported by the bearings that have begun to make noise. In addition, the relay regulator and the diode bridge are considered weak points in the generator. Albeit very rare, but in the secondary market you can find Sandero equipped with heated front seats. In our harsh conditions, the option is very useful, but unfortunately on used Sandero the driver's seat heating often doesn't work. Weak points include the loop of the driver's airbag loop. Problems with wiring on Renault Sandero begin only after a run of 200–250,000 kilometers. In case of malfunctions, first of all you should pay attention to the part of the wiring that is located under the hood. Over the years the wires in the corrugation of the driver's door are damaged. The first generation Sandero in no way pretends to be a car for active driving. Most of them have a 1.4-liter gasoline engine of the K7J family under the hood, developing 72 or 75 horsepower. Slightly less common is a 1.6-liter engine. Depending on the power and the number of valves, we will talk about units of the K7M and K4M series. All other things being equal, a 1.4-liter engine, the power of which is far from always enough, will have a slightly less resource. Nevertheless, regardless of the volume, all the power units that the Sandero hatchback shared with the Logan sedan boast a time-tested design at a very decent resource by modern standards. Another thing is that in the pursuit of reducing the cost of the car, Renault had to use not the best quality attachments and rubber products, which is why, with runs over 150–200,000 kilometers, minor problems and failures of individual elements of power units happen a little more than I would like to. Structurally, all Sandero power units have a lot in common with those motors that Renault used on its models in the late 80s of the last century. And that's a good thing in many ways. The main difference between 1.4 and 1.6-liter 8-valve units from a 1.6-liter engine with 16 valves is the way of adjusting thermal clearances. On 8-valve engines, a special screw is used for this. The slightly more modern K4M engine uses hydraulic lifters. Another fundamental difference is the design of the ignition system. One module is used on 8-valved engines and their circuit with individual ignition coils is implemented in a 16-valve engine. All power units available for Renault Sandero use a timing belt drive. Officially, the belt must be renewed every 120,000 kilometers. However, real operating experience shows that such a considerable service interval for the gas distribution mechanism is too optimistic. Since the quality of components for inexpensive Renault models often floats, it's advisable to reduce the timing belt replacement interval to 60-70,000 kilometers. Together with the belt, it's imperative to update the pump, since it will not stand more than 100-120,000 kilometers anyway and will begin to leak. In the early years of production, the 1.4-liter engine periodically upset with starting problems. At first, Renault dealers seemed on a poor quality fuel, but it soon became clear that the firmware of the electronic control unit leaves much to be desired. After making the necessary changes to the firmware, the problem is no longer relevant. Problems with the winter startup were also noted for units with a volume of 1.6 liters. It turned out that with a decrease in temperature, the grease thickens strongly, which is why the Bendix cannot disengage at the right time. Another childish problem is the leakage of the thermostat gasket. At first there were problems with the 16-valve 1.6-liter engine, but the blame for this is not the power unit itself, but the insufficiently reliable crankshaft damper pulley. The damper could suddenly collapse, after which its parts often ended up under the timing belt. The result turned out to be sad: a torn timing belt and bent valves. It's interesting that this problem is known from the second generation Renault Megane, but the French company for some reason did not consider it necessary to quickly solve it. In short, owners of a Sandero with a 1.6-liter K4M series engine should expect in advance that the crankshaft pulley will have to be preventively replaced every 80,000 kilometers. With proper operation and regular maintenance, any of the first generation Renault Sandero engines will serve up to overhaul of at least 300,000 kilometers. In most cases, the resource turns out to be even larger and may well reach 500-600,000 kilometers. It's not for nothing that Sandero, like the first generation Renault Logan sedan, is actively used by taxi services. By a mileage of 200-150,000 kilometers, engines can start consuming oil, but its consumption remains low for a very long time and doesn't progress. Moreover, there are cases when the owners of Sandero shortened the replacement interval and began to use higher quality oil, after which the already small oil burner practically stopped. Although by this time the oil will probably start to leak a little from under the oil pump cover and through the crankshaft oil seal. With runs over 200,000 kilometers, the cylinder head will start to sweat with oil. Since the leaks are small, most owners of used Renault Sanderos put up with them and are in no hurry to spend money and time fixing them. The most powerful 1.6-liter engine in the K4M family could be paired with a 4-speed DP2 automatic transmission. The rest of the power units were paired with an uncontested 5-speed manual gearbox. The design of the mechanical box was developed back in the 80s of the last century. However, despite its advanced age, it's not devoid of interesting technical features. In particular, in order to make the drives of equal length, the engineers had to replace the inner CV joint of the left drive directly inside the box. Fortunately, they didn't affect the reliability of the box. The main problem area of the mechanical box is the mega seal, which is prone to leakage. In the worst, but highly unlikely case, all of the oil can leak through it. Another weak point is considered to be the quickly wearing locking rings of the differential and the bearings of the input and output shafts. The owners of Renault Sandero with mechanics and weak synchronizers criticize. It's because of them that the first and second gears are shifted with noticeable effort. The rest no comment. More serious problems can be talked about only when the car's mileage exceeds 250-300,000 kilometers. To this mark, the tripod glass finally wears out, which ultimately ends up with the drive pulled out of the box and the complete loss of oil. Fortunately, this scenario is quite rare. Mechanics specializing in Renault cars advise the owners in advance to open the box to replace the shaft bearings, simultaneously changing the rest of the box parts that have practically exhausted their resource. By the distance of 300-350,000 kilometers, it's time to replace worn-out clutch forks and synchronizers. At the same time, neither spare parts for Sandero mechanics nor the prices of mechanics for work can be called expensive. There are incomparably more problems with an automatic transmission, and they arise at much lower mileage. The weak point of the box turned out to be an electronically controlled valve body. the development of which by engineers began back in the 90s of the last century. In addition, by designing the DP2 automatic transmission, the engineers deliberately saved on the cooling system. In the version of the box that is used by Renault, there is not even an overheating sensor. The situation is aggravated by the fact that the official regulations do not provide for the replacement of the working fluid in the box. As a result, the internal filter becomes clogged with wear products after some time, after which the box has to work in a constant oil starvation mode. Of course, the original owners of Logan and Sandero were delighted to be able to save money on maintenance, which is not the case for those looking at aftermarket options. With a mileage of more than 100,000 kilometers, problems arise with the valve body, which is primarily manifested by jerking when changing gears. Moreover, those Renault Sandero owners who move actively or operate the car in difficult conditions face similar symptoms already at 60-70,000 kilometers. However, you should not panic and definitely refuse to buy a Sandero with an automatic transmission. First, even if the machine is in a deplorable state, repairing it will be relatively inexpensive. Secondly, since the DP2 transmission, another option is DP0, has been installed on many other Renault and Citroën models, mechanics and many owners are well aware of its weaknesses. It's not surprising that on many cars you can find a self-modified box retrofitted with an effective external radiator and an external oil filter. As a rule, in this case, the owners do not skimp on changing the transmission oil every 60,000 kilometers, after which the problem DP2 automatic turns into a very good unit in terms of reliability. There are many known cases when calm drivers knew practically no problems with an automatic transmission up to a mileage of 300,000 kilometers. Suspension is a strong point of the Renault Sandero. In terms of settings, it's not much different from those on the Logan sedan. With the reliability of most consumables, the situation is also very similar. Front shock absorbers, depending on the quality of the road, withstand from 90 to 120,000 kilometers. Rear shock absorbers last longer, up to 150,000 kilometers. To the same mark, the springs practically develop their resource. If the vehicle is periodically heavily loaded, the springs will sag or burst even earlier. The silent blocks of the front levers will have to be replaced with a mileage of 90-100,000 kilometers. Ball joints have a similar resource. Silent blocks in the rear beam are ready to serve about 200,000 kilometers, but with only one condition: the rear springs must not be squashed. Otherwise, silent blocks begin to experience an increased load, which affects their resource. The weakest element in the Sandero suspension is considered to be the front wheel bearings. Especially unlucky for those motorists whose cars are not equipped with an anti-lock braking system. Due to the desire to save on literally everything, the holes in which the ABS sensors were supposed to be located were not covered in any way, which is why the hubs were constantly under the influence of dirt and moisture. The result is logical. Corrosion ate them literally for 30-40,000 kilometers. As a result, the hubs were modified, but even despite the changes made to the contraction, they rarely withstand more than 60,000 kilometers. As for the all-terrain version of the stepway, contrary to popular belief, its suspension is not identical to that of the regular Sandero hatchback. The stepway uses thicker springs and has several additional weld points at the posts. The hubs in the stepway version are also different, but in general, despite a number of differences, most of the suspension parts of the off-road hatchback withstand about the same as on the regular Sandero. Perhaps this is due to the fact that on the Sandero stepway, knowing about its increased ground clearance, the owners move a little less carefully. Instances that are not equipped with power steering are rare on the secondary market. But if the basic version of the Sandero is still found, it's worth making sure that the steering column does not play or creak. It's important to understand that unpleasant sounds in this case come precisely from the speaker itself, which turned out to be not designed for the loads that arise when turning the steering wheel on a stationary car. The steering rack in the Sandero is solid. Over time you will only have to monitor the condition of the anthers. In no case should they be allowed to break. There are no complaints about the durability of the steering rods and ends. A weak point in the Sandero steering is the line pressure sensor. It starts to leak at very low runs. In addition, with large runs, leakage can be found in the area of the rolling of the pressure line. The brake system in Renault Sandero is simple and durable. Another thing is that with rear drum brakes you cannot count on high efficiency. On the plain, braking dynamics is quite sufficient, but in mountainous terrain you will have to make an allowance for the fact that the Sandero braking system is unlikely to withstand repeated intense braking from high speeds. But these are nothing more than features that are not able to affect the success of Renault Sandero. Potential buyers who ask the price of a used French hatchback appreciate this model soberly and don't demand the supernatural from it. The very first generation Sanderos are now very cheap. If you are the owner, then be sure to leave a comment about this car. Your review will definitely help others with the choice of a car.